This podcast is funded by Ted Dintersmith, the executive producer of the acclaimed film Most Likely to Succeed, and the author of the best-selling book What School Could Be.
Hey everyone, welcome to the What School Could Be podcast. I'm your host, Josh Rapoon. Before we start the show, please check out all the resources at whatschoolcouldbe.org and our global online community. If you are a committed education change agent, ready to roll up your sleeves and reimagine teaching and learning, simply install the What School Could Be app on your mobile device or navigate to community.whatschoolcouldbe.org. I hope to see you there. Listeners, imagine waking up to a school day with no bells, no rows of desks, no rigid timetable of subjects broken into 50-minute chunks. Instead, you open your laptop or step into a learning space that feels more like a studio, a lab, or a mission control center than a traditional classroom. Your day begins by checking in with your learning coach, not to be told what to memorize, but to map out the goals you set for yourself, goals tied to real-world challenges, not just assignments. Maybe you'll spend the morning collaborating with peers from 5 continents on a project to design an accessible, renewable energy solution for a community you've interviewed over video calls. After a break, you join a live session with an astrophysicist or a social entrepreneur, an expert whose job it is not to lecture, but to provoke questions and offer guidance. In the afternoon, you dive into a self-directed sprint, researching, prototyping, refining. You'll log reflections, track your growth across competencies, and connect your work to global sustainable development goals. And all along the way, you'll be developing not just knowledge, but the habits of curiosity, collaboration, and self-direction that define lifelong learners. This is a glimpse into the school of humanity, an ambitious experiment in reimagining what learning can look like when it's no longer bound by the old industrial model. My guest today, Raya Bidshahri, is its founder and CEO. Drawing on her background in neuroscience, her passion for human flourishing, and her conviction that education must be designed for the future, not the past, Raya has built a model that blends purpose, agency, and global connection. In this conversation, we explore what it takes to create a learning ecosystem that feels alive, human-centered, and relevant, and why she believes every learner deserves the chance to be the architect of their own education. Raya is an award-winning serial education entrepreneur. She is passionate about utilizing education as a tool for sustainable development and human progress. She has expansive experience in designing, facilitating, and scaling innovative education programs. Among many other awards, Raya is listed by the BBC as one of the most inspiring and influential women on planet Earth. And now, here's my conversation with Raya Bidshahri. Raya, welcome to the What School Could Be podcast.
Hey, Josh. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so Raya, it is a regular Sunday morning in Dubai, and Raya Bidshahri absolutely needs a break from all things education related and from all the challenges that bring pressure and anxiety in the work. So what will Raya do on this bright, sunny, and clear Sunday in July of 2025 to clear her mind and nourish her soul? Like outside of education, what brings her joy?
Well, depending on how cool it is, because we go through quite 2 seasons in the UAE, extreme hot and pleasant. But depending on the time of the year, I find a lot of peace in the ocean. And we have a beautiful, beautiful spot in another emirate, which is about an hour and a half drive from Dubai, called Fujairah, which is lots of great sites for diving and snorkeling. And about once a month, I like to try to escape into the ocean and, yeah, connect with nature in that way.
And what happens when you're in nature? What goes through your mind? What are you feeling? Because I'm an ocean person too. I swim every single morning at 6 a.m. in the ocean. It's a distance swim, so it's my exercise, and it's like super crucial to my day. If I don't do it, my day just doesn't go the way it's supposed to go. So, what happens for you when you're in the ocean? What does that feel like?
I think it's the experience of immersion into, in some ways, another world, but also our world. So
Mm,
I feel this most when I dive. I also have been scuba diving, and I think that there's something about diving wherein you're not going through nature, you become nature
yeah.
and you become a fish, right? And you experience life as a fish and nothing else exists. It's just such a meditative experience in that sense. Like you're really present with it. There's also obviously the experience of weightlessness while you're experiencing it, the fact that sounds are subdued. So in a sense, you're almost like in a sensory deprivation tank.
Yeah.
And all of that together and the breathing, you have to breathe a specific way for diving. All of that together is just such a great recipe for me to put myself in a much more calm and zen and present state of mind, which,
Mm,
I don't actually find easy to accomplish in the default world. So
mm.
yeah, I think that's what it is.
Do you find that being in the ocean is a time to think? Like, do you let your mind just go wherever it goes, even if it's the stresses and strains of the work that you do and education and everything else?
So there's been moments where your mind will wander, especially as you get used to the experience of
Yeah.
diving and maybe the novelty of it fades a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think overall it's actually the opposite. So if I think of my own day-to-day experiences, my mind is usually in a thousand different places at once.
Mm,
And in some contexts, that's a superpower. If you're running an organization, being able to context switch between different teams is I think, that's where it's the strength.
yeah.
And in some contexts, obviously, can be a big pain. And I think when I'm in the ocean, I am only experiencing that moment.
Mm,
And it's from one moment to the next, especially if it's a day with great visibility and gorgeous marine life. I'm really present in there. And I'm actually not thinking about education and my company and everything else. And I think that's the beauty of it.
yeah.
And in that way, paradoxically, it benefits my ability to do my job because that moment of pause is sometimes what you need to be able to reconnect back to your work.
Mm. John Hattie, the great education researcher, talks about something called automaticity. And it sounds like that's the state that you get into when you've done it so many times. It gets to the point where your mind can actually slip into the present and let go of all of those things that you would otherwise be thinking about. And that sounds wonderful. I mean, that's my experience in the ocean as well. Occasionally, something will happen in my, periphery, right? It's like, some shape or something like that, and I'll snap to attention really fast. But otherwise, it's a really wonderful feeling to be present and to have all those things going on around you. So good for you. That's awesome. And that's actually a perfect segue to, you have received a number of awards and recognitions from global spotlights like Forbes 30 Under 30 and BBC's 100 Women list to sector specific honors such as GESS Education Awards, which is a benchmark event for innovators across the Middle East and beyond. And each recognition kind of lands in a different part of your life and resume, it seems, yet they all point back to your mission of reimagining this thing we call school. So, of all those accolades, which one most changed you, either by shifting how you lead or by opening a door you hadn't even knocked on yet? And why did that particular honor or accolade hit differently from the rest?
That's an excellent question and one I hadn't thought of before. I think for me, the BBC 100 Women list was a pivotal moment. It was essentially back in 2019 when BBC, as part of their annual list, curates 100 what they call most quote unquote influential and inspiring women.
Hmm.
And when they reached out to me to inform me, I didn't really realize what a big deal this list was until I saw that on the same list is Greta Thunberg and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and people that I could only admire. I didn't even imagine that I could end up in a similar category as them. But
Hmm.
what was really special about that experience, and a lot of people don't notice, but BBC has a BBC Persia kind of arm, and I'm Iranian. The list was also published in Farsi, and there was coverage in Farsi. And that was the first time that all my family in Iran were able to actually read and understand what I do. And I do
Wow.
speak Farsi and it's not my first language, but I can try to communicate it. But for a
Mm,
journalist to be able to communicate it in Farsi was really special. And then, then Iranian kind of channels and platforms started picking up on it and doing deeper dive features. And what was really special about all of that was being really able to celebrate that with my parents and not have to explain, like translate the coverage, and being able to for them to actually read it in their own language and
mm.
understand it and read about my work in our own language. So I think that was one of the most special experiences to go through.
Wow, I'm literally getting goosebumps here over in Hawaii, all these thousands of miles away. Well, how did your parents react? How did your family react? It must have been, that's so special. That's so amazing.
They were very proud, of course, and I think it's always a moment of pride for us as Persians and Iranians. We're often in the news for very different things,
Yeah.
right? And
Hmm.
it's not always the most positive light. It's very heavily politicized. There's an image of us that the world has. So there's always that element of, look, this is what we can do, and this is what we can be known for. And
Yeah.
yeah, that was really special to be able to like represent that way. And I think an extension of that was having my, younger female cousins reach out to me and say, I want to be like you when I grow up. And I think it was a
Mm.
nice moment to be able to be that role model for other Iranian women too.
And I know this might sound, maybe a little bit of an awkward question, but as they were reaching out to you and saying those things, what was it, do you think, that they were receiving besides just the news that you had been listed? Like what, you know what I'm asking?
Yes, absolutely. And it's actually a really deep question in there because
Mm,
I can start with how I feel when I receive that news, and then where I think it comes from them. I often feel a bit of survivor's guilt when
mm,
other young women who are locked up in countries with authoritarian regimes and don't have equal rights reach out to me saying that, because I feel like there's so much of that, the privileges that I've had and the opportunities I've had have come as a result of being able to have left Iran to begin with, right? Being
yeah.
able to have gone to English speaking schools, had parents who then could afford to send me to university in the US, and all the privileges that come as a result of that.
Mm,
And so there's always a little bit of pain in my chest when I think I just wish things were different and it was easier for you and that you didn't have to jump through so many loops to be able to have those kinds of opportunities.
yeah.
And for them, I think it's a moment of hope
Yeah.
that, I think, okay, maybe I can also leave Iran and make something of myself outside of Iran and have a positive impact on the world and be an entrepreneur as a woman and become a somewhat of a public figure without having to put on the hijab. And those opportunities, I think, are taken away, and those dreams are taken away from a lot of young girls in Iran. And being able to for them to visualize it is
Mm.
is has been I think the impact for them.
Wow, that's so awesome. Wow. So that's actually a perfect segue to my next question. So, Raya, you've described how your entrepreneurial journey began in high school, founding SciFest Dubai, co-creating Intelligent Optimism and Café Scientifique, and then later building She Works in the US before launching Awe Academy. That's an extraordinary string of ventures before the School of Humanity was even on the horizon. So, as you look back on that stretch, high school to Awe Academy, how did your own sense of confidence and agency evolve? Was there a particular project or turning point when you felt, I can do this at a global scale?
When I reflect at the beginnings and early in the journey, I was often collaborating with others who were taking the lead. And I mean that in a positive way. Like I
Hmm.
was fortunate to have at She Works, an incredible CEO that I was joining the team with. And similarly at SciFest, I was supporting the co-founders. And that initial experiences was really powerful because it allowed me to play the supporting role in other people's entrepreneurial journeys in a way that was still synergistic to my mission and the causes that I cared about. It also gave me initial experiences in both entrepreneurship, but also education, because a lot of what we were doing at SciFest was bringing in a love for science and scientific thinking through the general public in the masses. And there was a lot of educational angles to that. So the ingredients for launching an innovative online school one day were starting to form, whether or not I realized it. The pivotal point for me happened at university. I went into university with some kind of entrepreneurship experience under my belt, but I then decided to pursue a career in science. So I was actually doing my undergraduate degree in neuroscience. I was working in a research lab where we were doing memory research, and I thought I wanted to become a scientist. Then several things happened in parallel. One, I worked in a lab and I realized what actually conducting the scientific method entails. And my gosh, it's a lot of work and it's a very slow moving world and a very necessary world in terms of contributing to our body of knowledge, but it wasn't for me.
Yep.
And at the same time, I was reaching my limit with the formal education system. I was memorizing textbook after textbook, taking paper-based exams, sitting in large lecture halls, going through the standardized curriculum. And I felt like I wasn't learning the capacities I needed to flourish in life. And all of this just kept building up layer over layer. And it eventually got to a point where it was having a really debilitating impact on my mental health. And it was sitting in a lecture hall where half the kids were asleep, and it was a very boring
Yep.
lecture. And
Been there, done
I
that.
started
Yes.
thinking, yeah, I think we've all been there, right?
Yeah.
Where I started thinking there has to be a better way. I love learning, and that's kind of also where this was so. I always loved learning by doing and kind of following my curiosity. And the education system really took that away from me, and that was really painful. And it was in sitting in one of those lecture halls, I started thinking there has to be a better way to do this. And there has to be a better way to have a love for learning and feel awe and inspiration in that experience. And those were the early days of Awe Academy. It basically came from that place. And to quickly summarize what it was, we created an online platform that would teach the next generation future ready skills in an awe inspiring way through micro learning modules as well as projects. And we did some programs with private and public education providers. So it was a kind of extracurricular or supplementary solution, but it was one that then allowed me to learn as much as possible about the education system.
And along the way, somewhere along the way, and maybe it was Awe Academy, your confidence in yourself began to grow. And I wonder that you were aware of that almost at a meta level, like I'm feeling a little more confident. I mean, not that you would say that to yourself, but you get that feeling, because I'm experiencing that feeling now as I direct what school could be. And I'm 66 years old, and it's really trippy to be feeling that at this point in my life.
That's amazing. I'm really happy for you, by the way. I think it's really empowering when you feel that. I feel that way increasingly these days. And I know we'll get to my work today now, but I feel a lot. I do have days where I'm like, okay, I think I can put a great team together. I think I can do this. I can lead.
Yes.
But honestly, at the time, I don't know if I look back to 20-something-year-old Raya who said, I want to change the education system.
Yeah.
And the word I would describe myself, and it's the word I used with my therapist a few years ago, was delusion. And I mean that in the best way possible. Like, I think I didn't really realize at the time what that would take, but I think that was a good thing. Because I think if I did, I wouldn't have pursued it. There was this naivety of like, yeah, well, let's just start to create a new alternative education system. And I'm so glad I didn't know how difficult it would be, because I don't think I would have had the courage then. But I think a lesson that I've learned in life is every change maker, entrepreneur needs a healthy amount of delusion to think they can do it.
Yeah.
So it actually comes to fruition.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the idea that so many entrepreneurial efforts actually come out of a sense of naivete or actual naivete. And it's overcoming that and realizing that what you're actually working on is real and could be possible or will be possible because of your efforts. So that's really cool. And that's, a great segue into getting into the School of Humanity. So I want to dive into that now, but I'm going to come at it, Raya, using a multi part and hopefully unique approach. I don't want you to have to recite what you have shared so many times before on stages or in interviews. So it's imagine sort of like a planet and we're coming at it from, 360-degree directions. So here's the first direction. You shared a really compelling list of books that have influenced you. You cited both Transcend and Rise Above by Scott Barry Kaufman, Collective Illusions by Todd Rose, the Three Body Problem series, Pale Blue Dot by Carl Sagan, and Unweaving the Rainbow by Richard Dawkins. So before we talk about one of these books specifically, I'd love to ask in a more general way, what is it that books like these do for you? What do they give you or awaken in you? And as a former history teacher, I love through lines. So is there kind of a through line in this list that you can identify?
As you read the books, or as you read the name of the books, I immediately think of the cosmic perspective.
Hmm.
And the pale blue dot was very transformative for me in that sense. I first came across the monologue, like most people, the pale blue dot video. And that was the first time I really thought about myself and humanity from that cosmic perspective, from zooming out and thinking about that lens of looking at the world.
Hmm.
And within that cosmic perspective, it's looking through the world through the lens of science. And I don't mean as science as just a body of knowledge, but science as a way of thinking and a form of, and a method of forming a perception of reality based on the scientific method.
Hmm.
And a lot of the work that we do at School of Humanity in that context, I see as building this human development system that allows us to progress as a species and that is meaningful in this cosmic grand perspective.
Hmm.
So, the books you listed touch on this idea, touch on the idea of transcending as a species, going beyond the traps that we have in our minds, and developing ourselves as human beings in a way that makes our existence in this universe meaningful.
That's the through line. Right? That is the through line. It's that idea of developing yourself as a human being within the cosmos. And every time it sounds like, or it felt like as I was doing my prep, every time I learned a little bit more about you, it felt as if these books were somehow connected to the development of that, of yourself as that person in the cosmos who is doing the work. Is that a fair way of looking at it?
I believe so. And it's a aha moment for me at this moment as we uncover together. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Yeah. So I want to dig a little bit more into Pale Blue Dot and come at it from a slightly different direction. And again, this is kind of connected to starting to understand what School of Humanity is. So I have not read Pale Blue Dot by Carl Sagan, though I watched Cosmos when I was a kid. Wow, I love that series. But I did my research and learned this book is his profound reflection on humanity's place in the cosmos, inspired by the, as you mentioned, iconic photograph of Earth taken by the Voyager 1 spacecraft from nearly 4 billion miles away. Sagan uses this vantage point to explore the moral imperative to cherish planet Earth and protect it. And I wonder, Raya, how the idea of a moral imperative figures into your creation of the School for Humanity, which began as another of your startups.
It's a fascinating way to think about it because I do believe, on one hand, we absolutely have a moral imperative to take care of our planet. There's a concept emerging around intergenerational fairness. And I know we are both very passionate about the idea of becoming good ancestors or being good ancestors as a
Yeah.
species.
Mhm.
And the way that we are pushing our planetary boundaries today is absolutely a form of theft and abuse to future generations. We're leaving them worse off. So there's absolutely a moral imperative. But on the other hand, I think the thing that really drives me towards a lot of my work is just coping with the situation that we're in. It's a coping mechanism more than anything. When
Mm.
I feel this existential angst about some of the ways that I feel like we're straying the path as a species or not, harming our planet, it becomes overwhelming. And one of the only ways I can positively cope is by channeling that into something meaningful, some work that I think can at least in some way contribute to tackling that challenge.
Mm.
So for me, I think if I'm honest, it comes from this coping mechanism,
Mm.
but you're absolutely right in that it's also a moral imperative.
So one more follow-up before we go to our first break. So it sounds to me, I love this idea of, it's a coping mechanism. And who boy, today in 2025, it feels like we're all kind of coping at a really high level here because things are crazy. But I wonder, Raya, if at some point as you were developing the School for Humanity and actually beginning the work with your learners, that you were beginning to cope together because they share the same worries and concerns and maybe even the same desire to cherish the planet. Like, I don't know if that makes sense, but it's like instead of being alone and a blue dot in the middle of the cosmos, that you're actually in it together with your young learners, coping together, figuring it out together. Is that a fair way of looking at it?
I love that way of looking at it. I think it also applies to the team as well, the founding team that we're working together with. And for a lot of us, we came at it from very similar pain points, either as parents or learners
Mm,
who were frustrated and wanted to channel that frustration into something. I always say I think learning is so much more meaningful and incentivizing when it's driven by a desire to better ourselves and the world,
yeah,
right? And if we can change the incentive of learning away from just the test score or grade to I am learning this so that I can be a better informed, or I can somehow contribute to improving it for our world, or somehow improving myself. I think it sounds like such a basic, simple thing, but we've really lost touch with that incentive of learning in our education systems today.
yeah,
And I really
agreed.
hope that we can reconnect back to that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well played. So, hey everyone, we've been talking to Raya Bidshahri. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi, this is Greg Bear, along with Ryan Rudzeski, and we're the co-hosts of the Remaking Tomorrow podcast,
a series of conversations about the future of learning.
We encourage you to find and listen to the Remaking Tomorrow podcast wherever you listen to your pods.
You'll find over 60 past episodes that you can browse and listen to whenever you'd like.
Remaking Tomorrow is powered by Remake Learning. Learn more at remakelearning.org.
Do you believe there's a better way for individuals to learn and fulfill their human potential than in traditional schools? If so, then join me on my two podcasts, The Future of Education and Future You, where we explore these issues and more. My name is Michael Horn, and I've been working to build a better future for all individuals for over 15 years. I'm the co-author of multiple books on the future of learning, including my latest, From Reopen to Reinvent. And you can also stay up to date with all my writing through my Substack newsletter, The Future of Education. Join me as we create the future of learning together.
What I find that I value most from leadership experiences is being able to work with a variety of different people.
At Inspire Citizens, we support schools with whole school global citizenship education. Hear stories of this work directly from students on our Empathy to Impact podcast.
When you do something good, you feel good inside as well. You're helping people. You're making a change.
How might students transform your community today? Find out by listening to the Empathy to Impact podcast.
Everyone, we are back with Raya Bidshahri, founder of the School of Humanity. So let's continue looking at the School of Humanity from unique angles. So Raya, you mentioned that one of the sparks, you talked about this just a minute ago, one of the sparks for your work came in a moment many of us can picture: a lecture hall, a boring lecture, half the students asleep, you sitting there wondering if something more inspiring could be possible in education. So I want to go a little bit deeper into this moment and wonder if you could take us back into that moment and, like, in more detail, what were you seeing, feeling, or realizing that stayed with you and ultimately set you on this path to the School of Humanity? What were the beyond just like there has to be a better way, what were some of the questions that may have been coming up in your mind at that point that are really sort of entrepreneurial questions and thinking, what you really wanted to move forward with?
So I think important context to have about that moment is I actually love science and I love neuroscience. This particular lecture was from a memory class in my in a neuroscience program. And I fell in love with how the brain works through the works of V.S. Ramachandran, Oliver Sacks, these famous
Mm,
neuroscientists popularized the field. I fell in love with the way they did their storytelling, the case studies, and really connected the concepts to how incredible it is that you have this brain that is able to contemplate the nature of the universe and contemplating itself the nature of the universe and kind of and all of that. And so I had experienced learning these topics in an inspiring way.
mm,
And I just felt like we weren't doing them justice. And I just to share another similar anecdote, I remember in one of our physics classes, I happened to be reading the works of Fritzsche Capra, who loves exploring the parallels between concepts in like quantum mechanics and emerging physics and drawing parallels to Eastern mysticism without drawing any kind of fluffy conclusions, but just kind of making these interesting parallels. And at the same time, I was in this physics lecture, and they would talk about things like the double slit experiment, which is one of the most fascinating experiments where photons behave differently when they're being observed and has all these philosophical implications. And the
mm,
lecturer just skims through it. And so I just felt this constant contrast between how I felt like this could be taught and how it was actually taught. And it just felt like such a loss.
mm.
And at the same time, I felt really cheated because it was also expensive. We all know how expensive college is and
Yes.
stressful. And so when I started to think about, okay, how could we do this better? I then started to draw upon the times that I've learned where I've really enjoyed learning and I've been really engaged with learning, which have
Mm,
been learning through projects,
yeah.
having some elements of open-endedness, curiosity-led learning to it. And those were the questions I was asking myself that led me to eventually transition to building something in the education space.
Mm,
And just to kind of draw the link from how I went from there to starting School of Humanity, Academy was designed to be a supplementary or extracurricular solution to the education system. And over a few years of working on that, I learned a lot about the public and private education sectors, as well as started to get a deep insight into cutting edge pedagogy, things like challenge based learning, project based learning, interdisciplinary education. But I really started to see that a tweak to the existing system wasn't going to do it.
mm,
And if it was an extracurricular solution, the system was just ultimately designed to incentivize the core formal exam-based curriculum. Like the extracurricular stuff was just always going to be a tiny little bit of an add-on.
right.
And at the same time, I saw that there were these truly alternative full-time programs emerging that were reimagining schooling, but they were isolated examples in specific communities and not accessible globally. And so those were the kind of early thoughts and challenges that
Mm,
led to me thinking, what if we could start an alternative online high school that took progressive and innovative learning models, move them online, and open them up to the world?
mm. So I want to come at this from a slightly different angle, but the same topic. So, and you shared with me, and I loved and I really appreciated your vulnerability in talking about what I sort of characterized as adventures or misadventures with grades and grading as you were coming up through school. How did studying the brain's learning and motivation mechanisms help you make sense of your own swings between, for example, A grades and lower grades? And how have those insights shaped specific design choices at the School of Humanity that honor the diverse ways our brains engage with this thing that we call learning?
It's a great question. And to some just context for listeners, essentially what you're referring to is, and up until 11th grade, I was straight A student
Hmm.
with no issues, taking tests, doing well. But beyond that, I came close to failing most of my
Hmm.
classes. And the pivotal point was losing motivation and losing any incentive to memorize for exams. Like I just got to a point where I wasn't motivated to sit down and memorize a textbook. I had no interest in it.
Yeah.
And in retrospect, I think there were several challenges that one could explain from a psychology and a neuroscience perspective as well. I think there were definitely attentional challenges. I've never been officially diagnosed with ADD, but I definitely, my teenage years, I was completely spaced out. I don't know what, I had really deep struggles focusing. And, connecting that to an intentional design, I think learning by doing and project-based learning, bite-sized learning is a great way to try to tackle that for a generation of kids that are struggling with attention.
Yeah.
The other angle to look at it is this idea of internal versus external locus of control, or intrinsic versus imbalance with intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation.
Right.
And I think I was, for various reasons, in a system where I didn't have as much internal locus of control, and I didn't feel like I did.
Yeah.
And that was very difficult for me. And one way we tackle that by changing the way we design the educational journey is by creating room for much more open-endedness.
Yeah.
For learners to say, this is a problem I care about. I am going to tackle it, decide how I develop it. And, you can still have structured learning journeys, but also having more open-ended ones as well.
Yeah.
And last but not least, I think I had very difficult relationships, either lack of role models or mentors, or ones that just I had challenging relationships with. And so when we developed our mentorship program into the school, we were very intentional around the code of conduct and the ethical relationships between a mentor and a mentee, and the balance that we try to draw up there.
Yep.
And ensuring learners always have a coach and an advocate that doesn't cross certain boundaries. And so, yeah, those are some of the ways I think I can draw those challenges that I face and the way that we try to tackle it today at School of Humanity.
Wow, amazing. So Raya, the School of Humanity is featured in the final episode of a PBS documentary series titled A Brief History of the Future. And there are two moments during this segment I want to ask you about. So first, you are shown as the teacher convening a class on what appears to be day one. And the first thing you do with your young learners is ask a question. You ask, why are we learning this and why is it important? And I confess, Raya, not once in my years in school, and that was a lot of years, at any level did I ever hear a teacher begin this way. So at both a conceptual and practical level, why begin this way?
Oh, we start all of our lessons that way. We have a rule. It's like in our template for our lesson outlines is we start with, why are we learning this? Or sometimes, why are we doing this if it's more of an admin focused lesson. And I mean, it's because we owe learners an explanation of why we're learning this. And there are so many concepts that have applications and importance, and that we never actually allow learners to make that connection with.
Yeah.
And it also forces us as educators to take a step back and say, how can I show learners the relevance of this? And then it almost forces you to then design the entire lesson from that application perspective, to be able to then make that connection to how they're going to use it and why it matters.
So I don't want to put you on the hot seat, right, or put you in an uncomfortable space, but it feels to me like it's almost a moral imperative, going back to Sagan, that we do this with students, that we ask that question in the beginning. It feels, and I'm speaking from my 66-year-old self that's gotten a little cranky lately with how slow education changes. But sometimes I wonder, it's like, it's almost immoral to ask learners to sit down and just receive without knowing why they're doing it. I wonder how you feel about that.
I couldn't agree more. And I think there's a step before that where we need to even answer that question, which is when we form and when we set curriculum standards.
Yeah.
And it's at a national level, at a global level, at a school level, those initial learning outcomes that we set as our curriculum.
Yeah.
I think as a society, it's long overdue that we go back to the beginning and start from scratch and ask ourselves, what are the most in-demand skills of the future today? What are the needs of human progress? What do these young minds need to flourish in life? And then with those questions in mind, what are the necessary knowledge, skills, and mindsets that we want to set curriculum standards or outcomes around? And I believe if we asked ourselves those questions today and started over, we would land in a very different place, even in many subject areas that are core literacies,
Yeah.
than we'd have most traditional school curriculum. And I think it's outrageous that most national level schooling systems have failed to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Couldn't agree more. It is. It's outrageous. Okay, so Raya, a bit later in the same PBS series segment, the host, Ari Wallach, sits down with some of your students and asks them a pretty stunning question, which is, what tomorrows do you want to see? And again, I was never, ever asked that question in my schooling. So I wonder if you can channel your students, Raya, and give us examples of what tomorrows these kids want to see and how the School of Humanity helps them begin the journey.
Ooh, it's an excellent question. And, one of the quotes that we share with all of our learners during orientation is the Buckminster Fuller quote that we are the architects of the future, not its victims.
Yeah.
There's a similar quote from His Highness the Ruler of Dubai where he says the future belongs to those who can imagine it, design it, and execute it. It's not something you await, it's something you create. And we work really hard to try to inspire our learners to take that mindset. And so every term our learners learn through real world challenges. So I do get an opportunity to see how they would envision creating a different future for humanity. And some of the concerns or trends or visions that commonly come up, one is around this harmony with nature, designing with nature, biomimicry. They are very, very concerned about artificial intelligence and similar exponentially advancing technologies. I'm constantly inspired and surprised at the same time with how when AI started emerging, immediately they started thinking about the ethics and societal implications and what does this mean for our world. And so I think a world where we maintain our humanity in the age of AI is definitely one. Many of our learners still have that cosmic perspective and want to see futures where we explore the universe. And last but definitely not least, this idea of equity and equality, how we ensure all human beings can, have a path to self-actualization, regardless of where they're born. And I think that our learners have a special ability to pursue this because we are a global high school and we have full-time learners in over 30 countries across 6 continents. And because of our financial aid program, we have learners from all kinds of income brackets, including those from backgrounds that otherwise would never have been able to access this kind of education. And we can see that that gives them just a different perspective, especially if from a privileged background.
Wow. Raya, would one of the tomorrows that your young learners would like to see, to design, to construct, is one of those tomorrows a time when the assumptions of adults that kids should sit and listen ends? You know what I'm asking? It's like that sense of, I don't know what it is. In all these years that I've been involved in education, it seems to be a particular struggle that when folks become adults, they stop thinking that kids have any contributions to make. And the kids, on the other hand, are kind of calling BS on that idea increasingly these days and saying, we already have experiences under our belts that help us to see what the tomorrow is that we want. You know what I'm asking? It's like, do you get that from your learners, that they feel like that and they want to live in a world where their voice really matters from a very early age?
Absolutely. And I think that as adults, we also need to really reframe how we think about this. One of the learners that I've had the privilege of working with, mentoring with, his name is Adam Al Rafe, based in Dubai. He constantly advocates for this idea of ability, not age, and helping the world see what someone can contribute regardless of their age and taking age out of the equation.
Yeah.
The other thing I've been advocating for is this idea of youth boards and having youth representation on boards. There are many companies that are now starting to do this in interesting ways. And last but not least, we started earlier in this conversation talking about that naivety and the delusion. Another way to reframe that is younger people generally tend to be more bold. They tend to be willing to take risks that our world sometimes needs.
Yeah.
And they tend to have more of that creativity and imagination. And these are strengths that, they have in those formative years. And we ought to tap into that more as a society.
Mm.
And yeah, so to summarize, I couldn't agree more. And I think there's just such a incredible asset that we have in our world with young people that's untapped at the moment.
Yeah, I love the idea of seeing naivete as a strength rather than something to overcome. That's awesome. Okay, so Raya, one more question before we go to our second break. The Agora School in the Netherlands, Nuvu Studio in Cambridge, the Green School in Bali, London Interdisciplinary School, Minerva in San Francisco, One Stone Lab School in Idaho, and the School of Humanity all offer radically different visions of what learning could be. But they're also easy for skeptics to dismiss because most or all are tuition-based, selective, or outside the public system, which means they don't have to take every learner who shows up. So how do you think about that tension, that these models can feel inspiring, but also out of reach for the millions of kids in public schools around the world? And what would it take, in your view, to make this kind of learning accessible and equitable at scale? And I apologize, I know that's a huge question, but what do you think?
It's a crucial question. I'm glad you raised it. I think there's a couple of angles to tackle this with. On one hand, overall, I believe a healthy education system is one that has many different kinds of options. I really do not believe in a one size fit all. Even from a purely private perspective, I don't believe in a winner take all model
Yeah.
in an education system. What we really need is lots of different alternatives so that learners and parents can find a model that is right for them in their given city. So on that one angle, I really believe there is a need to have so many different options. Now, to the question of equity and how we increase access, I think that it ultimately has to come from greater public investment into education. So right now in the US, there's a big tension around this idea of school vouchers, right, and education
Yes.
savings accounts. And to summarize for anyone that's not aware, essentially, this is an opportunity for families that are pulling their kids out of public school to still get access to that public funding that their state would have spent on their child,
Yeah.
and instead allocate towards alternative vendors like homeschooling solutions, online schools, and so on. And it's an increasing movement in the States.
Yep.
And I'm a big advocate for it as so long as it comes with greater investment in into the public system. So what I mean by that is right now, a lot of the tension between these kinds of private alternatives and vendors that might qualify for ESAs and public schooling system is that resources are scarce. There is such limited spending into the education system that as you take it away from public schools, there is this greater risk of what's going to happen with the public system. But if that's coupled with increasing investment into education, which I think many of us recognize is incredible catalyst for economic growth, that could be a really powerful thing.
Yeah.
So I hope for a model of schooling that has greater private-public partnership that can allow such models to be equitable. Just to share one example here, in the UAE and some other countries, there is an interesting trend of governments contracting private school providers to run their public schools.
Mm-hmm.
So they essentially take really high quality education vendors that would otherwise have been, maybe out of reach for those in the public system, and instead have them run the public schools. And it becomes free for its constituents and citizens, but it means that you're still delivering that quality. And what's interesting is if you look at the average annual spend per student, it's actually, if you look at most public systems, if you converted that into private school tuition, it's actually a very high quality kind of tuition bracket, right? So just to kind of bring this to a close, I think it ultimately comes down to greater public spending into education. And I think there's incredible potential with private-public partnerships in the education space.
Yeah, I love the idea. It's, again, almost back to a moral imperative that however we proceed forward with ideas around individualization or personalization or vouchers and things like that, that it should come with a increased investment in public education. I think that that's just a tremendous idea, and I love that. So well played. So hey everyone, Raya and I will be right back after the break.
Hi, I'm Ricardo.
I'm Mary. And I'm Liz.
And we co-host Course Stories, a podcast produced by the Instructional Design and New Media team at Arizona State University.
In this podcast, we tell an array of course design stories alongside other ASU online designers and faculty.
Join us as we talk to the course design experts about shaping the future of online education. Tune into Course Stories, where innovation meets instruction.
Find us wherever you listen to podcasts.
Course Stories!
Perfection.
Hey there. Are you interested in hearing weekly conversations with authors, leaders, and practitioners at the forefront of learning and education innovation? Then you'll love the Getting Smart podcast. This podcast amplifies the incredible work being done by some of the most innovative minds in education. Learn new leadership styles, new technologies, new frameworks and mindsets, and get the fuel you need to stay motivated and curious. Together, we can empower all learners to thrive. It's available at gettingsmart.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Ever made a tough decision and looked back and wondered, what did I miss? What happened? What could I have done differently? I'm Peter Stiepelman, the host of An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership podcast. After nearly 30 years in education, I know that real leadership isn't about perfection. It's about learning from mistakes, embracing growth, and lifting each other up. Join me each week as I talk with leaders who reflect on their challenges, their relationships, and the lessons that made them stronger. Because imperfection, that's where the real learning happens. Listen now on your favorite podcast platform.
So hey everyone, we are back with Raya Bidshahri, founder of the School of Humanity. So Raya, in your Substack post titled The Future of Educators, you wrote that tomorrow's teachers will look less like sages on the stage and more like learning architects, curating resources, coaching mindsets, and co-piloting real-world projects. That vision echoes what UNESCO and KnowledgeWorks and even Forbes are predicting. Generative AI and other forces are pushing educators to become designers and mentors rather than content deliverers. So against that backdrop, where the role is evolving faster than most teacher prep programs and colleges of education can adapt to, what do you think will be the hardest mindset shift for educators who entered the field believing their main job was to teach content?
What I've observed from experience, having recruited educators from around the world and having worked with my team to train them into teaching in a way that resonates with our learners, is one of the biggest mindset shifts. It's not even the transition from transferring knowledge towards curating it. It's getting comfortable with the messiness of learning.
Mm-hmm.
I still believe there's incredible value in good scaffolding, good structure. Especially younger learners really need those frameworks. And there's so much that we know from evidence-based education on how to impart knowledge. But when it comes to project-based learning and interdisciplinary learning and personalized learning, it's often messy, it's often uncertain, and it's often nonlinear. And I've seen really experienced educators struggle to be comfortable with that. There's this anxiety of like, are we doing the right thing by the learner?
Yeah.
But if you think about when you learn something by doing on your own, let's say you're trying to learn how to be better at Excel.
Yeah.
Most people don't learn that best by going through 10 hours of content, right? You maybe watch one YouTube video, you try a few things, doesn't work, you try Googling it, and then you try it again, and then you watch another video, and then you work on it for a few hours, you get someone's feedback, and then you try again. And learning by doing is just inherently nonlinear and messy.
Yeah.
The other concept relating to this is the idea of emergent curriculum. So we're used to in the schooling system to kind of create the curriculum for the learners, and then learners follow that curriculum, we facilitate it and so on. But in challenge-based learning, you go in with a certain framework and you facilitate the process of every learner creating their own curriculum pertaining to a problem they want to tackle. And the curriculum emerges as a result of that. And so that mindset of starting with not much and then ending in a place where
Yeah.
you do have a curated list of resources or an incredible project and a structured plan for the learner, can also take some getting used to. So those are some of the mindset shifts I think I've seen most people struggle with.
Wow. I love the idea. Well, so, okay, let me see if I can gather my thoughts here and ask you this follow-up question. What I observed over my 17 years in the classroom was that messiness, which I love how you described that, was like literally like a disease that teachers wanted to avoid in some way. It was, something truly horrible was messiness. And so coming at this from a different angle, Raya, imagine for our listeners what a future without exams would look like. What is the argument for doing without them? And by definition, when you do without them, I think you head into a much messier space.
Yes. And I think it's important to start with why we have the exams that we do. And
Yeah.
my definition of an exam in this context is standardized tests, right? Whether
Yeah.
it's subject-based or aptitude-based, that's open to discussion.
Yeah.
I mean, first of all, they're incredibly scalable. It's so easy to administer to
Yep.
millions of students if you want to measure where they're at.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's also very scalable from grading perspective, right? Multiple choice tests are just, you can automate that nowadays. But the challenges that you have with most traditional time-bound, paper-based, closed-book exams is if they're not aptitude-based, they focus on recall rather than future skills. So even, let's say the APs as an example,
Yeah.
yes, they measure some skills, but in order to be able to apply those skills in the exam, you have to have memorized a lot of information.
Yeah.
And we know how useless recall is in today's world when we have the world of information at our fingertips. They're also not a holistic measure of intelligence. There are many different kinds of being smart that are just not measured through an exam. And you can imagine the impact that has on young minds who are maybe spiritually intelligent or kinesthetically intelligent or intrapersonally intelligent and just don't get a chance to showcase that in a test. And finally, there's a lot of future ready skills that are not measured, and they don't measure your progress, your effort,
Yeah.
and so much more. So I think what we try to do, my team and I, is go back to, again, first principles thinking. What are we trying to do with assessments? And it's the evidence learning. We want to know whether learning has happened. And then you ask, okay, what are some ways that you could do that in a way that is as relevant to the real world as possible? And so what I argue for is a combination of formative or micro assessments along with project-based assessments, as well as giving learners freedom to evidence the learning in a way they believe is fair.
Yeah.
And to explain each of those, formative assessments are basically micro, like day-to-day assessments, small quizzes here and there. They're low stakes, they're non-threatening, and you can do them whenever in the learning journey and potentially even retake them. Project-based assessments, as the name suggests, are just projects that you use to evidence your learning. They're often graded against rubrics, and there's different approaches to those rubrics. And finally, learning in so many different ways in life gives them a chance to evidence that. Like if they are doing a course in data science or if they've done an incredible volunteering program, have a methodology of actually them uploading that evidence and saying, these are the skills I've attained through this process, and I think I should receive credit for them.
Yeah.
And so there are alternatives out there, and I think the technology is getting there. And I think, some standardized testing will probably always have a place in our world. I can understand the power of PISA and, some national level testing to gauge where our fellow young citizens are at scale.
Yeah.
We really have to move away from them being the only and main way of measuring whether learning has happened.
Yeah. Love that. Growth, Raya. We want to focus. If we're talking about why we're doing what we're doing, let's talk about why growth really matters. And I love how you draw the connection between that sort of micro check-ins that allow you to see growth over time at a really kind of granular level. And that's really inspiring. I imagine back when I was in school, had that been the way that I was evaluated, was growth over time, almost from day to day, I would have been, instead of a, cumulative, and I'm very proud of this, high school GPA of 2.2, that I would have actually been a quote unquote A student in terms of growth over time. So I love that. Okay. So slight kind of left turn here, Raya, but staying with School of Humanity, and again, another sort of perspective on this. Inspired by Roman Krznaric, you wrote powerfully about the good ancestor approach, specifically in your piece on transforming education by thinking in generations, where you invite educators to step out of the short-term mindset and adopt what you call a cathedral thinking lens. So what does it feel like, Raya, day to day, to be engaged in work that aspires to be a cornerstone for something larger and longer lasting than any of us will see in our lifetimes? And what kinds of practices or commitments help you stay connected to that longer horizon when the immediate pressures of the present inevitably wrestle for your attention?
Wow, what a question. It's of course it's meaningful. It's really purposeful to have a mission so much bigger than ourselves. And I think I speak on behalf of my team when I say that.
Yeah.
But it comes with challenges because we live in a world of short-termism. You know, as an organization and essentially as a startup, it's so challenging to make that long-term case to investors or funders. Many people are looking for both short-term impact and short-term returns. At the same time, even conversations with regulators are really challenging because things move so slow and at that level.
Yeah.
I remember in our early days having a conversation with a regulator and explaining some what we were doing. And it was a country that had really stringent rules on innovation and education, innovation and schooling. And the advice they gave me was, you know, look, we're not going to change our laws anytime soon to allow for these models of schooling. Why don't you go to the US or somewhere where it's, you know, legal to have schools like this, prove it out there with a graduating class or two, and then come back to us. And essentially what they were saying is, why don't you come back in 4 to 8 years?
Yeah.
And this was a country where its children really needed alternatives. Disengagements were increasing in the education system. School refusal was increasing in the education system. And so you're constantly hitting these walls, and it's very difficult to kind of to stay focused on this intergenerational mission.
Yeah.
When everything around the world is built on these short-term attention spans. And paradoxically, what's frustrating is also this lack of urgency.
Yeah.
Right? It's yes, it's intergenerational, but it's also going to take a really long time for every country in the world to suddenly have these next generation of education systems. So we have to get moving, and we have to get moving now if we're going to get there in the next few decades or next century even. And so it's like balancing this long-term vision with this sense of urgency in the present.
Wow. Wait. So maybe a little bit more explanation. I love the idea that you're of that balancing between that long-term vision and that cathedral thinking, but you're dealing with the urgency, which is urgency by definition, like short-term thinking, like you have to deal with the problem, deal with the problem, deal with the problem. Is that kind of what you're describing here?
I think of it as taking action as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
That's the way I think about it. It doesn't necessarily mean you're taking action with the short-term goal in mind. It means any movement towards that vision is a good thing. I think the danger with taking too long of a view is that the end goal might feel slow moving. To share maybe a different parallel example to this, I was recently listening to a podcast from a podcaster I really enjoy. It's a podcaster who focuses a lot more on current affairs and politics and rarely touches on climate issues. And he brought it up in a kind of AMA session, say, look, the issues with potentially our democracy in the US being at a risk, or the potential rise of fascism is current. It's now. We have to take action to it. Whereas, you know, if we do have a climate catastrophe, it's maybe a decade or two away and we can wait with that.
Yeah.
And my challenge with that is, you know, the solutions to the climate catastrophe will take even longer to implement at systems level or at national level, which is why we have to have a sense of urgency now.
Yeah.
And so I feel the same way with our education system. Is I know how much time it's going to take to completely transform the system, which is why this long-term vision has to have this element of we need to get moving today.
Wow, I'm having another one of those goosebump moments, Raya, because I'm thinking about your learners. That was one of the things that was really enjoyable about preparing for today, was that I felt like I was channeling them at the School of Humanity, and thinking that that what you just described, Raya, is what you're part of what you're doing, or maybe it's a huge part of what you're doing at School of Humanity, is together, collaboratively together, all of you are walking through trying to figure out what that balance is between what's urgent and in the now, and what is that long-term voyage that we're on. What is that Tahiti over the horizon that we want to sail to, right? Does that feel kind of like, at a real meta level, what happens or what is happening is that there is that wrestling. It's kind of a lifelong thing that you're wrestling with, how to find the balance between the urgency and the long view.
I think you've articulated really well.
Awesome. Okay. So, speaking of, and this is a bit of a turn as well, you shared that one of the big questions on your mind these days is whether violence and war will always be part of the human story, or whether it's possible for us one day to live without them. I'd love to hear more about what draws you to that question. What has your thinking about this now, and how, if at all, does it shape the way you approach your work with young people?
So, the reason that's on my mind is obviously with everything happening in the Middle East right now. At the time
Yeah.
that we're recording this, just until a few weeks ago, there was a conflict between Israel and Iran. And as an Iranian, that was really top of my mind. At the same time, which was a rather interesting parallel, my partner was like, why don't we start watching the Andor series? And if you haven't watched Andor, it's one of the Star Wars franchises where it's all about the beginning of the rebellion, and the rebellion trying to stand up to the emperor and fight for freedom. And the existential angst I was left with these two parallel experiences, is sometimes there might not be a nonviolent way out of a terrible situation. And I say this as an Iranian speaking for 70% of the population that don't support the current regime, that feel terrorized by the current regime, that have seen loved ones get executed just for a basic level of freedom, and wondering if there's a nonviolent way out of it for my people.
Yeah.
And in that is a bigger question of, even if I zoom forward into thousands of years from now, is there such a thing as a truly peaceful or pacifistic society? Or will we always have some fighting to do, even if it's fighting for a good cause?
Yeah.
And I think that the challenge with that, with even thinking that, is a part of me doesn't want that to be true. I want to be a pacifist, and I want to believe that we can have truly peaceful dialogue, but what if you can't reason with a tyrant? What if the only way out is fighting your way out? And so those are just some of the kind of just existential questions on my mind these days.
And is this part of the School of Humanity? Are these some of the issues in the challenge-based learning? I mean, I can imagine no more difficult challenge than trying to figure out, the various answers to the question that I just asked. Is that part of what the ethos of the School of Humanity is?
Absolutely. One of the challenges we ran, actually this last term, was around maintaining global peace. And, these challenges often raise more questions than they answer them for our learners. But
which is great.
yeah, we looked at it from different angles, looking at human history and what we can learn from all the, big world wars. And we looked at, from a psychology perspective, and the biology behind violence, and where that's ingrained into our minds. We looked at it from an economics perspective, and how resource scarcity often leads to conflict. And then in the investigate and act phases of the challenges, learners got to pick their sub-challenges and decide what they wanted to act on next. And yeah, I think these are big questions we ought to ask ourselves. But there's also so much of it that we can tackle by going back into our education system.
Yeah.
If we can do our best to teach all young minds diplomacy and how to disagree with kindness, how to expand your circle of empathy, connecting with others from around the world, like those fundamental values and skills, if we really tried our best to ingrain them into the next generation, I hope that we can have a much more peaceful society in the future.
Wow. Raya, it happens in every episode, and I say it in every episode, as there is this moment inevitably where I want to go back to school. And that challenge that you just described, oh my God, had I been able to be in something like that when I was in middle school or high school. Oh, I don't want to feel regret. I will not feel regret in this moment. I've learned a lot. But wow, had that been possible, you know, that's just an incredible challenge. And I guess my hope and my dream, and it's part of the reason why I do this podcast, is that every kid, 100% by yesterday, that's the tagline that I originally started the podcast with, 100% by yesterday, that every kid would have an opportunity to go through a challenge like that at least once in their schooling career. So, good on you and good on the School for Humanity for taking kids through those kinds of challenges. So, Raya, I typically end episodes by giving guests the opportunity to shout out to someone upon whose shoulders they stand, that person who mentored, coached, guided, sponsored, and lifted them up. And you cited Chris Colbert at the Harvard Innovation Lab. So I did some digging, and wow, he has some resume. Amazing. So in what ways has Chris shaped the life and work of Raya Bidshahri?
So Chris is an incredibly wise and experienced human being that I was lucky to connect with in the early days of School of Humanity. And he joined as a founding team member, and now he sits on our board and has been an amazing mentor figure to me. And I couldn't ask for a better mentor on this journey because of how passionate he is about humane leadership and maintaining our humanity. I think in a world where a lot of people build teams in a transactional way, especially at startups in general. He's been amazing at reminding the team and I that we're human beings. We ought to approach things from a place of love, and we ought to develop and nourish one another throughout this journey. And that's been just a really powerful mindset I take away. And all that incredible experience also means that he's been an amazing person to problem solve with. And anytime we're in a mini crisis or an existential angst, is just an excellent thought leader with all of his wisdom and experience. So yeah, I wanted to give him that shout out.
Wow, that's awesome. So Chris, if you're listening to this episode, you rock, #you rock. And we're actually dedicating this episode to you and all of the great humane mentors out there that help individuals realize their dreams and move through their naivete to reality, as you described, Raya. So it's always super inspiring to me to hear the stories of these giants upon whose shoulders folks stand. And for me, it's very personal because I've got a long list of folks that have served that role for me. So that's awesome. So Raya, wow, this hour has gone by really fast. You're amazing. And I just love the idea. I think I would kind of sum it up by saying, I love the idea that all of these different types of models, School of Humanity being one of them, provide these demonstrations of what school could be. And if you take them all together, it's a remarkable sort of encyclopedia of all of the possibilities for teaching and learning. And so what school could be just wishes you and your school the best of luck, and we'll be following along the way. And thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation with me today. Thank you, Raya.
Thank you, Josh. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I really appreciate how thoughtful your questions have been. So thank you for the opportunity to share my story.
Thank you.
Our editor, creative consultant, and sound engineer is the talented Evan Kurohara. Our theme music is created by a remarkable pianist, Michael Sloan. Producer of 12 albums with over 100 songs, Michael Sloan is featured in Apple Music, Spotify, and all major music platforms. You can also find his work on his YouTube channel. Michael has listeners in over 100 countries and 2,000 cities. We'd be grateful if you would support these episodes with leading edge, innovative and imaginative educators and students by giving us your own rating and writing a review wherever you get your podcasts. This series is sponsored by Education Change Agent, Ted Dintersmith, executive producer of the award-winning documentary film, Most Likely to Succeed, and author of the best-selling book, What School Could Be. If you are committed to rolling up your sleeves and joining thousands of educators, business professionals, nonprofit leaders, and parents as we reimagine education to be relevant and learner-centered, please join the What School Could Be global online community. Simply log in to community.whatschoolcouldbe.org or download the What School Could Be app from your favorite app store. The What School Could Be podcast is brought to you by Josh Rapoon Productions. Send your feedback to josh@whatschoolcouldbe.org. Follow the show on Twitter @WSCB Podcast and on LinkedIn @Josh Rapoon. Listeners, one of the most important things we all can do is to bring kindness and compassion into the world. For sure, we need a surplus of both right now. Until next time, ahui ho, and thank you for listening to the What School Could Be podcast.